Well, hello there everybody, and a big warm welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. Thank you so much for coming. We're delighted to welcome on stage Salla Simukka and Sophie McKenzie tonight, who are going to chat about their fantastic writing and books that we've got. So, Salla, would you like to introduce your book and do a little chat about what you've been writing about?
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that I'm so happy to be here in Edinburgh. This is my second time in Edinburgh, but this is my first time at this book festival, and I have heard so many great things about the festival, and I'm so happy to be here, to be talking to you, to be talking to Sophie, and meeting all the people who like reading and like books. I'm a Finnish author. Flew yesterday from Finland to London, and then today I took the train from London to Edinburgh. And I am mostly here to talk about my latest trilogy called the Snow White trilogy, and mostly about the first book, which is called As Red as Blood. It's a thriller set in Finland, and the main character is 17 years old. And That's like in a nutshell.
It's a super book set in Finland, and would you like to read a little bit about it, just as a taster for everybody? Because
I could actually read a bit about the book and then see what I'm going to tell about it more. So here is about the main character. As I said, she's 17 years old. And she's called Lumikki Andersson. Lumikki means actually Snow White in Finnish. It's not a usual name in Finland, I must say, but it's a possible name. I know that there are about 10 or so girls living in Finland with the name Lumikki. They are quite young, but there are girls who have that name. And when I decided to write books that are called As Red as Blood, As White as Snow, and As Black as Ebony, I of course also knew that I want to have my own Snow White in the story, so the main character became Lumikki. Lumikki Andersson, the Swedish-Finnish girl from Riihimäki, the one who had a carefully considered opinion about everything, the one who made straight tens in physics and philosophy. The one who played Ophelia so that 2 teachers got mad and the rest were moved to tears. The one who didn't participate in any of the school's pranks or parties. The one who always ate alone but never looked lonely. She was the puzzle piece that didn't have its own place, but could suddenly fill in almost any hole you needed it to. She wasn't like the others. She was exactly like the others. And then we will follow Lumikki to the school's dark room. Lumikki leaned against the wall and stared into the darkness with closed eyes, emptying her mind thought by thought. Easiest was getting rid of the day-to-day, mostly trivial concerns that revolved around the coming math class, maybe going to the supermarket after school, maybe doing combat in the evening. But now, for some reason, she couldn't even get past the surface noise. Something pushed back. Something intruded. A smell. The dark room smelled different to usual. But she couldn't quite place the smell. She took a step forward. Something gently brushed against her cheek, and she jumped back, turning on the red safe light. A 500 euro note. Dozens of 500 euro notes hanging in the dark room to try. Were they real? Lumikki touched the surface of the nearest one with her hand. The paper felt real at least. She looked to make sure no photographs were developing in the processing trays, and then turned on the normal light. Banknotes against the light. The watermarks were there, as were the see-through numbers. The security threads and holograms were in place. If the notes weren't genuine, they were extremely well-made forgeries. The liquid in the processing trays was orangey brown. Lumikki tested it with a finger. It was water. Looking at the darkroom floor, she saw it covered with reddish-brown smudges. She looked at the corner of one banknote, which had the same russet tint. Then she knew what had disturbed her in the darkness. The stench of old dried blood. And this is how the story begins. And then Lumikki gets involved with kind of very dangerous situations. And yes, so I won't go too much into detail into the plot because I think it's best.
Don't give it away.
Yeah, it's best to.
She's such a strong character, Lumikki, isn't she? She's a very strong individual girl, a very young girl who is dares to be herself, absolutely. And Sophie, I think you choose to write about strong characters, strong girls too in some of your books.
Well, I'd definitely say that some of the I've written probably over 20 YA books, and in some of them the main girl characters have been very strong in the very traditional sense of being very feisty and go-getting and fearless. I'd say Lauren in Girl Missing and Charlie in Split Second are girls like that. But I don't think that's the only way of being strong. And quite a few of my books feature girls who maybe have who are more reserved, perhaps a bit shyer, maybe have some insecurities, and they're strong too, but in a different way. And we were discussing before we came in here how frustrating it is sometimes when people seem to only want one type of girl heroine, when and by that we don't mean readers, I don't think, but sort of the publishers,
the critics.
There's definitely a desire to see lots of Katniss Everdeen's out there, and they're great. They are a fantastic character, but you don't want every single girl character in a book to be the same. I mean, I want to be able to write lots of different characters.
Yeah, and what is strength? When we think about it, is there only one way to be strong? And also what I'm sometimes quite frustrated about is that we call girls with different qualities strong, as if we had a boy with the same qualities. We wouldn't call the boy strong. Is it actually that we are not writing strong female characters? We are writing female characters. We are writing real complex personalities.
Yes,
and it's exactly. It's not that they are strong. It's that they have these different qualities in them.
Yeah, because we want to reflect all different types of girls, which also means people who aren't necessarily strong in any way.
No. and also what I personally love about Lumikki is that even though she has these qualities that we can think of as strong, she also has her weaknesses, and she might not always be a nice girl. You might not always feel like she's doing the things that a nice girl should be doing. And
it's often through flaws and the vulnerability of a character that we connect as a reader. That's certainly my experience. If the character's perfect, well, whether it's male or female, I'm much less likely to identify with them. It's more interesting to read about somebody who's vulnerable, who makes mistakes. And again, the great thing as a writer is that you get to write about all sorts of different vulnerabilities and all sorts of different flaws. You're not just writing the same person over and over again.
And of course, there are so many layers in one person. And on one day, we can be in some ways, and then another day we are totally different. And I think that those different types of personalities can also be living in the same person. And that's what I always want to write about the characters who are complex, who have these different qualities in them. And also when I'm when I'm writing to young people and when I'm talking to young people, I always want to say that you don't have to fit in any category. We are human beings. We are not categories. So that you can be many different things at the same time. You don't have to choose.
And that's true of books too. That, we're kind of forced to describe our books and make them or present them as if they're in a genre, really, so that it's easier for the booksellers to know what shelf to put them on. Mm-hmm. Actually, I don't know about you, but I like all different genres. It's the story that counts. Is it a good story? Mm. And I think there's a lot. That's the same kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Labeling and
that's true, because we both have written books that can be described as thrillers. But what is a thriller, actually? When I wrote As Red as Blood or the whole trilogy, I thought that of course it was nice and interesting to write about the crimes, try to write a novel that the reader has to read from page to page. But for me, actually, the books are mostly about the main character, about her development, about her personality. Mm-hmm. So it was just, the thrillers were just a way for me to write about my main character, in a sense.
Yeah, it's very clever the way that you've done it with thriller, and you've also managed to bring in the Finnish sort of fairy tales bit side of things. I wonder if you're able to explain a wee bit without giving too much away how you've managed to do that in your book.
When I can tell a story about how I got the first idea for the whole trilogy. It happened actually spring 2011, and I was visiting Frankfurt in Germany. And I went to a bookstore, and there I always want to look at the books for young adults and what's in and what the people are reading. And then I realized that, okay, there are quite a lot of crime novels here. And even though I have written now altogether 13 novels for young readers, so I had not written a crime novel before, so I thought that would be interesting. And then it hit me that As Red as Blood, that would be like the perfect title. And of course I knew at that moment that if I'm going to have a book that is called As Red as Blood, I will have to have As White as Snow and As Black as Ebony. So I had the titles first. Titles for the whole trilogy, and I knew that I had to write it. And of course, because the names are coming from the classical Brother Grimm's fairy tale, I wanted to use the fairy tale in some ways. But the books, they are not a fairy tale retelling. They are not fantasy books. There is nothing supernatural in the books. But I wanted to use the fairy tale as an element in the language and as in references. And so if the reader has read quite a lot of fairy tales, they will pick up those. And okay, this is from Snow White. This is from another fairy tale. But I didn't want to underline it so that it would be totally clear for everybody.
Very cleverly done, absolutely.
But Sophie, you have also experienced a bit with the old stories with Shakespeare.
Well, there's a romance series I wrote called about River and Flynn, and basically the first book, Falling Fast, is where Flynn's playing Romeo in his school play, and River auditions to play Juliet, and the story takes place as the production of Romeo and Juliet is. She doesn't get the part of Juliet. Her very pretty best friend does. So, and the story of Romeo and Juliet, in many ways, very similar to how you've described. It's not a retelling by any stretch. It's more sort of a springboard for the series, and there are 4 books, and it echoes some of the main ideas in Romeo and Juliet, but it's not a direct connection. It's very similar. It's sort of, as I say, a starting point.
But I think it's as an author, it's really enjoyable to be using these stories that we all know, and to be able to, if I'm writing about Snow White and I put an apple in the book, then at that moment, we realize that, okay, something dangerous is going to happen because of the apple of the poison, because of this and that. And you get like these associations for free as an author. Yeah. So I think that's also true. Great and interesting to be playing with the stories we all know. As with Romeo and Juliet, of course,
because lots of people have done retellings, very direct retellings, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. Like, you obviously didn't want to write Snow White again, but you just use it as a way into a modern story.
And so for your latest book, All My Secrets, would you describe that as a thriller? There's a bit of a romance going on there as well. How would you describe that one?
Well, I'm often surprised by the way people describe, like, for instance, Blood Ties, which is a book of mine which has romance in it, has been described as a thriller. It's about human cloning. And I remember somebody saying, oh, that's science fiction book you wrote. And I'd never thought of it as science fiction, but I suppose technically it is, because it's set in a near future and it's about cloning and humans being cloned. So with All My Secrets, in terms of the feel of the book, it's more like Girl Missing than anything I've written since, I think, because it is a thriller, but it's very much a personal, the main character is on a personal journey, finding out things about her family, about her past, and it's a mystery, I'd say, maybe more than a thriller. Having said that, it's got lots of action in it, lots of adventure, danger. So a lot of hopefully fast-paced scenes, which are the hallmarks of thrillers. But it's also got loads of romance. Yeah. Well, got a love triangle.
Love triangle in it, absolutely. Sophie, would you like to read a little bit from that book?
Your copy. Thank you. This is actually the proof copy. That's not what the real book looks like. It has a beautiful cover, may I say. I'm delighted with the cover. I think it's really atmospheric. So All My Secrets is about Evie Brown, and she's a very ordinary girl. She's just done her GCSEs, and she's lolling about on the sofa at home, and there's a knock on the door, and there's a lawyer at the door, a solicitor, who's been trying to track her down. And he comes in and sits down with her and her dad and tells her that she's inherited £10 million. And they're astonished. They have no idea where this money could have come from. And I'm going to read to you from the book where Evie finds out where this money actually comes from. So the first chapter of the book. So as I say, the lawyer, Mr. Treves, he's there in the room. So is Evie and her dad, and her mum's just come back from picking up the younger kids from school. So mum walks into the room, and she sees that there's a stranger there, Mr. Treves, and she says, "Oh, hello." Mum glances at Dad, clearly expecting him to perform an introduction. But Dad is still sitting, stock still, mouth gaping. "I'm sorry, I've brought some rather surprising news for Evelina," Mr. Treves says, standing up. "Evie?" Mum turns to me, her eyes all curiosity. It's the last moment that I trust her or Dad. I stand up beside Mr. Treves. Somebody's left me £10 million in a trust fund or something. I turn to Mr. Treves, ignoring the widening of Mum's eyes. "Who is it?" Mr. Treves clears his throat. "You've been left the money by an Irina Galloway." Across the room, Mum slaps her hand over her mouth. Dad lets out a low moan. I turn to Mr. Treves. "Who on earth is Irina Galloway?" "No." Dad jumps up. "Stop! Please." Mum's normally rosy cheeks are as pale as paper. "Please don't say any more." Mr. Treves fidgets from foot to foot. He looks desperately uncomfortable. "What is going on?" I demand. "Who is Irina Galloway? How do you know her? Why has she left me all this money?" "She has to know," Mr. Treves is talking to Mum and Dad now. If you don't tell her, I'm afraid I must. No. Mum is clinging to the door, tears well in her eyes. Tell me what? Fear and dread rise inside me. Dad shakes his head. We can't, he mutters. Not like this. We can't. I turn to Mr. Treves. Tell me, I insist. Mr. Treves draws himself up. I realise now, having talked to you, Evie, that this will come as a shock, he says, a little shake in his voice. But Irina Galloway was your mother. So, Evie has found out that the mum she has thought was her mother all her life was not in fact the woman who gave birth to her. And that opens, as you can imagine, a huge can of worms and lots of questions that her parents are very unwilling to answer.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there is like this big family secret.
She's been lied to all her life, and you can imagine it really disturbs her. She goes off the rails a bit, and she gets sent to this island called Lightsea, where she's with a group of other teenagers, all of whom have been packed off there to sort out their dysfunctional personalities, and various seemingly quite spooky things happen on the island and dangerous things. And that's also where she meets a very attractive boy and then realises there's another boy she really likes too, and on it goes.
Complicated, yeah.
Yes, actually about the family secrets, because there is also, in my trilogy, there are the crime plots, there's different crime plot in every book that starts in the book and ends in the book. But then also there are these storylines that go through all of the three books. And one of those storylines is also a family secret. And in the second book, in the very first pages, there comes a young woman to Lumikki and tells her that I think that I am your sister, and she has never had a sister. So there is also this family secret, something that has not been said out loud. And then in the third book, we will learn what has really happened in the family. But I think it's really interesting also to be able to write about the family secrets, because I think that every family actually has their secrets.
Yeah.
So,
well, this particular secret, not telling somebody that their birth mother was not the mum they've grown up with, I really got the idea for that because from a real life thing, and it's quite rare that real life incidents or events are the starting points from my stories. But in this case, there was a family that I knew, and very sadly, the mum of the two children, a little boy of 3 and a baby, the mum died. And she knew she was dying. And she said to her husband that she didn't want anyone else, she didn't want their children to call anyone else mummy. And this was like her dying wish. So he said, okay, he made her that promise because she was dying. And I mean, what a terrible thing to know you're going to leave behind your little boy and your newborn baby. She dies. Fast forward a year or so, and he meets someone else. And she's wonderful with these two children, and they adore her. And naturally, they start calling her mummy. And he lets them. He doesn't try and stop that. And I've thought about that. This has happened a long time ago. And I've thought about it many times, about the ethics, the morality of what he did, because he basically, he made a promise to his dying wife and then broke it. But I think he was right. I think he was right both to make the promise, and I think he was right to break it. And it kind of makes you realise that truth and lies and secrets, and that it's all often a lot more complicated. You know, it's really it can be easy when you're standing at a distance to think things are very black and white, but actually when you're in the middle of people's emotions, it's often much more complicated than that.
Not so easy, absolutely. most of the book, All My Secrets, is set on Lightsea, the island, which is that based on a real island? Is it based on experience, or where do you get your inspiration from that?
The island of Lightsea is set off the coast of Scotland. It's not a real place, but I suppose it's quite a mysterious place, and the light is amazing around this island. And I suppose, if anything, it was really inspired by my memory of a visit a very long time ago that I made as a teenager to the Isle of Skye. Now, Skye is much, much bigger than my imagined island of Lightsea, but something about the light and the landscape was definitely in my head when I was writing the island in the book. There's also a scene set in Edinburgh, by the way. Where Evie goes to visit someone. I won't give away who, but she goes to visit someone who lives on Rose Street, and the only reason that is in that book is because of me coming to the Edinburgh Festival for many years now and loving it here so much.
Brilliant.
So it's my little homage to the wonderful Edinburgh Festival.
Oh, fantastic.
But you usually write about places. If they are real places, you write about places you know of.
Yes, and then that's really because I'm quite lazy, and it's just easier to write. I don't know. It's just easier to write about. I also don't write fantasy. I think for much the same reason. I don't know about you, but it's easier to set your book in the real world where people walk down a high street and there's Marks and Spencers on the one side, and I don't know, Lidl or Poundland, and it's all Starbucks. They're references we can all identify with, and it means a fantasy is so much harder in that respect because you have to build the whole world of the story from the ground up. I don't know about you, but that's one of my reasons for not doing it.
I can relate to that, but actually it was a bit mysterious why I started writing books that are set in the real world, because as a young person, when I started writing, I only wrote fantasy. And there was a period in my life that I also only read fantasy books. But then I think that at some point I was like, been there, read that, because all the fantasy books, they started to also resemble one another. And after I had read all of Tolkien, all of David Eddings, all of everything that was available at that time, I was like, okay, now I'm done with this. But as having said that, I must say that nowadays I think there are many, many great fantasy books. And I also think that one day I might also be able to go back to my old love of fantasy books. But for the real places, it's also, when I wrote As Red as Blood, because it's set in Finland in a very, very, very cold winter. It's minus 30 degrees Celsius. Does that say anything?
That's really cold.
Yeah,
very,
yeah.
very
So
cold,
it's like really, really cold. It's not usually that cold in the wintertime in Finland, but sometimes. And it's also set in Tampere, which is the second largest city in Finland, also my hometown. So I know all the streets, and when Lumikki is running from one place to another, I know how long it takes to run from that place to that place, and I know that she's running a bit faster than I am also. Because she's a bit more fit.
But the contemporary, setting your books in the real world and in modern day, making them contemporary in all those ways, that does throw up a lot of problems as well. Like, for instance, the amount of help that's available to younger people, or the amount of technology. So one of the reasons for setting a lot of the book on the island of Lightsea is that there's no phone signal.
Of course.
Because the mobile phone, honestly, it's the bane of contemporary thriller author's life, because there's always a phone that you can use to contact someone to get out of trouble. So it was lovely. It was such a luxury to no signal. Great.
Absolutely. All phone lines down. Absolutely. That was great.
But you can also actually use mobile phones as part of the thrilling elements in the books, because also I think it was in the third book that Lumikki starts getting these very threatening text messages.
Yes, I found that too.
And she doesn't know who's writing those.
Yeah,
and someone is saying things that I can see you, I can see what you are doing, and it's also so they can also be used in that way.
That's true.
Salla, are you able to give any more clues about any more things that happen in your trilogy without giving too much away?
Yeah, well, in the first book, as we have now learned, there is the money, and then the money goes all back to drug industry and drug criminals also living in Finland. And so in the second book, that starts with the young woman coming to Lumikki and telling her that she's her sister. That book is actually set in Prague in a very hot summer, because I wanted to have this contrast with the first book, and there it's mostly about the family secret and also about a very dangerous religious sect that the woman is involved with. So the crime comes from there. And then in the third book, Lumikki gets a stalker who is sending these messages, and so the third book, I think that's mostly about Lumikki herself and about her secrets and what has happened in the past. There's also a love story. We don't learn quite a lot about it in the first book, but then in the second book, we realize that there is a person, or there has been a person in Lumikki's life, the greatest love story of her life, that has happened a year before. And there is, and that was a bit of a problem for the translators, because in Finland we only have one pronoun for both he and she. So that's very clever in the Finnish language. So when you use just this one pronoun, you don't know if you're talking about a girl or a boy. And in the first book, the person is mentioned, but actually you don't know if it's a boy or a girl. And then in the second book, I'm not going to reveal, because it's of an importance that you actually don't know it in the first book. There is an explanation for it in the second book, and it's a big part actually of the story. But that was a real challenge for the translators, because the book, all the whole trilogy has now been translated to nearly 50 languages. So there are quite a lot of translators who have been dealing with the problem, because I don't know if there
How do they get around it?
Well, some of those could work around the problem. I think it's also, I don't recall how it was in the English translation, but I think it's not said out loud in the book. I'm not sure, actually. No,
it's quite clear in the English translation how it actually works.
Yeah,
that must be a problem for them when they're doing that.
And then of course there are these languages that you just have to know, because it affects everything. It affects the adjectives. It affects everything. So then I have just said that, okay, use this. So no.
Brilliant. And Sophie, with regards to writing, can you tell us a bit about your inspiration for any of your books that you've done, or just this particular one?
Well, I talked about the island and the very sad story of the woman who was dying. Usually with books, and All My Secrets is typical of this, the process of getting ideas really is like you have a little bit of an idea from here and a little bit of an idea from there, and maybe you pop them into your stew of ideas, and eventually what emerges is the starting point for a story. And sometimes people send me stories or ideas, and one of the things that they very often do is mistake an interesting situation for a story. But it's those interesting situations which are often things that go into the little pot that you stir, and gradually an idea emerges. And it's very hard to unpick that, to explain how that works or where those ideas come from or how they've all melded together in your brain in the stew, to mix a couple of metaphors there. But one exception to that was Girl Missing, which was a very straightforward story idea. I was looking on the internet, just browsing. I'd seen a program about missing kids, and then I found a missing website, and I saw a boy on this missing website who had gone missing, who I remembered going missing when he was about 2, and he would now be 14, and there was an age progressed picture. And I thought to myself, what if that boy, now a teenager, is looking at this missing poster too, wondering if he is that missing child? What on earth would he do? What would I do? What would any of you do? And that was a starting point for Girl Missing. And it was such a single, simple and strong idea that it gave the impetus for the whole of that book and Sister Missing and Missing Me, which followed on. That's actually a very odd, unusual circumstance.
This is actually great, because I also have one novel where the first idea was coming from the missing persons and from the what if question. Because my what if question was that, what if a person that goes missing comes back and all the other persons, all the other human beings in the whole world have gone missing. Yeah. So that was also like the really really strong first idea.
Something strong and simple. But it doesn't often happen like that, in my experience. Normally there's a little bit of this idea, a little bit of that, and then you remember that and somebody says this, and gradually an idea emerges. But that
usually it takes about 2 or 3 ideas that emerge together, and then they can build a book. And when you said that people mistake like these interesting situations for
an actual story,
and also some people are saying that I have had such an interesting life, it would make a great story. And I'm like, or not. Because usually, but that's true. Because usually, what has happened to real people that might not, even though it might be really interesting, it might not make a great story. Because the things that happen in the real life, they are not coherent. They are not logical. They might not be surprising in a way that you want them to be in a great story.
Yeah. So, well, one thing I try and do, whatever I'm writing, is make sure when something happens, it's both unexpected and yet convincing. And that's a really good example of how real life often isn't like that. Yeah. So fascinating things can happen in real life, really interesting things, but often things that you knew were coming. And if you put that in a book, you'd have to write it very carefully so that in some way you didn't know what was coming. Otherwise, there would be an element where it was all very predictable for the reader. So, yeah.
And also when people are asking me what comes from my own personal life, and I'm like, that's not interesting. Of course, there are things that have happened to me, or that I have thought about, or that have happened to someone I know, but I don't think that's the most fascinating part about writing, because the things that have happened to me, or the things that come from my personality, I think that they are not important in the reading process. I think what's important when a person is reading my book, it's not the thing that, okay, this has really happened to Salla. The important thing is that the reader can think that this has really happened to me, or this could really happen to me. And I think that's a connection. I don't want to break that connection. I don't want to come in the middle of the reader and the book, because I think there is the reason why I became an author, I think, is that I have experienced those magical moments with the books, that I'm alone in the world with the book, and it's like everything that surrounds me is the world of the book. And the connection is so strong and so magical that I think that it's the best thing in the world. And I thought that if I can create such moments for other persons, it's the best thing I can do. So that's also the reason why, of course, I could tell that, okay, we listen to the same kind of music, me and Lumikki, or we like our coffee black or something like that. But I don't think that's really important.
No, that's not enough. But total immersion, engaging your reader as fully as possible. And what about the actual writing process, Sophie? When you're writing a book, does it just go, or do you have to stop and then restart? How does it work for you, or does it just depend what you're writing?
Well, I guess it's in 3 stages, just as it is for anybody in the audience who ever has to write anything, say for a teacher. No, it's planning, and I don't plan everything, but I plan an outline, and then getting down and writing, where, like you were saying, I get lost in the world of the book and really enjoy that, just as I might if I was reading something. Mm-hmm. And then editing. And I think it often surprises people how much of the work of writing a book is actually rewriting it and reworking and editing and refining and honing and whatever words you want to use, but just realizing that the first draft is only a start, only the beginning.
Yeah. And how do you find it, Salla?
I can really relate to that. It's so true. And of course, also when you are a published writer, you have an editor, and a good editor is it's wonderful to have a good editor, because a good editor can read the book and see the things that are not quite working yet, and that I should do something about, and that's something I usually can't see myself at that point, at least. About the process of the Snow White trilogy, I have to say that I think it was the most absurd writing process I have had in all of my life, because the books came out in Finland, so that there was only half a year between each book, and I didn't have like the second and third one already in my in my computer at that time. So when the first book came out, I was in the middle of writing the second, and when the second came out, I was in the middle of writing the third book. And writing the first book was the most fun I have ever had with a book. And I had been an author for almost 10 years when I started writing this book. And I was like, is this legal? Because I was so used to it that writing a book is quite difficult and it's a hard work. And I was like, there must be something wrong with this, because I'm having so much fun. But I think that it was that I had gone into a new genre. I had a great main character. I had really, really fun with Lumikki when I was writing the books. But when I was writing the second and the third one, they were really, really difficult. And the third one, I think that was the most difficult writing process I have ever had, because I was writing the book, and when I was writing it, the rights of the whole trilogy, all of the 3 books, had already been sold to over 30 countries. So imagine that. You're writing a book that doesn't exist yet, and you know for certain that it's going to come out in over 30 countries. It's like, no pressure at all. No, it was, and I just had to not think about it and try to concentrate on writing the book and making it as good as possible, and making it the way I thought would be the perfect conclusion for the trilogy. So it was really difficult.
Very hard going, but you managed brilliantly.
But I actually think that if these had been my first books, I couldn't have done it. The pressure would have been too much to handle. So I'm very, very grateful that this didn't happen with my first books, so that I was used to writing books, and I think it's also a good thing that I know how it is to be like a normal writer in Finland. Know that there are a couple of readers, a couple of critics on each book, and that's it. And you can't live on it. You can't support yourself by writing just books in Finland, usually no. And then now living a totally different life as an author, traveling around the world, meeting readers from different parts of the world. And so I think it's great that this happened just now and not before.
planning. Now, I was wondering if anybody has any questions for Salla or Sophie from the audience. Is that we've got a little bit of time if anybody would like to ask anything. We've got a roving mic which can come this direction.
When you're writing a series, do you ever find that you get to one of the later books and you want to go back and change something, but you can't?
Yes.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
It's a very simple answer, yes. Every series I've written, or even like if it's just a second book, a sequel, always there's something you think, if only I could go back, then I could set that up there and that would be so perfect, but you can't.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm happy that I actually, when I started writing the first book, I had quite a clear vision of the second and the third one. So I knew what's going to happen in the second book and in the third book. So I could also have used those elements in the first book. And I think that if when you have read all the three books and then go back to the first one, you will realize, okay, this is what she meant.
Well, you did a very sensible thing in planning your series. I really enjoyed writing that book. I think I'll write another one with the same characters. In fact, I'm trying to decide right now with all my secrets whether my next book, which I should be getting on with in about a month's time, starting to plan and write, whether that will be a sequel to All My Secrets or whether I should just do something new. So
oh, goodness.
I'm trying to decide that right now.
Trying to decide that one. Wonderful. Anybody else? Yeah? There's one down here. Thank you.
What's the favourite book you've written?
My favourite book that I've written is probably, favourite in terms of whether I think it's the best or not, and then favourite in terms of actually really loving writing it. And I don't know which of them is the best, so I can't answer it from that point of view. I really can't. But in terms of what I enjoyed, I would say the Falling Fast series, the River and Flynn series, they are my favourite books that I've written, I guess. Yeah.
Salla, do you have a favourite one that you've written?
I should say All My Secrets, shouldn't I? It's related. It's All My Secrets.
As well.
Well, I think, my first book, it came out in Finland in 2002, and actually I wrote the first version of the book when I was 18. So in many ways, that's my favourite book. Because it made me a writer, it made me an author. So, and also it actually came out now this fall in Finland for the second time. So we did new covers for the book, and so it was great to be able to read the book that has now turned 13 actually, and when I'm reading it, it's like, it feels like I'm a big sister to my younger self. It's like, "Aw, you wrote this. It's so sweet." So in that sense, it's my favorite. Yeah.
I think there was another question just here.
Sophie, I'm directing this at you. I know that you've written 2 books for adults. When you started writing, did you really make a decision to go into the young adults scenario or genre, if you want to call it that? Because it seems to me that there was probably a big dearth of people not writing towards that age group, and perhaps you saw that and decided did you consciously decide to aim at that to start off with?
Again, I'm not that clever to have seen a gap in the market and gone and tried to fill it. No, I actually started off trying to write a picture book, the board book for smallest children, because I thought it would be easier. And how wrong was I about that? Because I think sometimes the shorter books, which have to be so strong and so simple, are the hardest to write. So I gradually worked my way up the age, because I went on a writing course which happened to be writing for children, and I thought, I know, picture books are short, they'll be easier, I'll do that. Found it really hard, so gradually started writing books for older and older children with older and older characters. Found it really difficult when I was writing characters of 5 and 7 and 9, and eventually I got to 14. And something happened. That was when I wrote, because I started 17 books, mostly with younger characters, didn't finish any of them. And then I got the idea for Girl Missing, which I mentioned earlier, and I started writing it from the point of view of Lauren, 14-year-old girl, and suddenly everything fell into place. And I thought, this is my home. This is my writing home. I found it. And that was how I got to write YA. It really found me rather than the other way around. And then the adult thing was more that I had an idea for a story with Close My Eyes, which is my first book with adult main characters, more adult themes. And Close My Eyes, it was obvious as I was thinking through the story, that there was no way it would. I mean, it's about a woman who has a baby that's stillborn 8 years ago, so there's obviously no way the main character can be a 14-year-old. So it dictated the fact that it was going to be a book for grown-ups about grown-up characters. And then having written that, and it was a challenge to do it, I went on and wrote Trust in Me. And in fact, my next book is another book for grown-ups, which is coming out next month, called Here We Lie. Here We Lie. And I've really enjoyed doing that. And now I'm writing a book for grown-ups and a book for teenagers. And I hate actually putting it like that, because in my head, they're all books for me that I'm really enjoying writing. They just happen to have older or slightly younger characters. And I really like being able to do both of them. It keeps me fresh. Writing writing about older people is great, but then I get to come back and write about younger people, and I really enjoy that because it's fresh, and just having that having the contrast is really good. Mm-hmm. But no, not very little of it was a conscious decision based on what might work in the publishing industry or what might sell books.
Brilliant. And Salla, what's next for you? Do you have plans?
Well, actually, I'm now writing a new book it's something completely different, that I can say.
Okay.
Not much more, because it's in so early stages of the process. So I love the feeling that it's still something just for me and probably for my editor, but like it's like having a secret that that will come out someday, but still it's something that's only yours. So yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Sounds wonderful. Well, I think all it remains to do is to say a huge thank you to Salla and Sophie for coming. There will be a book signing event in the children's bookshop, which is just out here, and turn to the right if anybody would like to come along to that afterwards. But can you just join with me and say a huge thank you very much for them?